I'm Mariska Nani, Media Relations Manager here at AfriForum. AfriForum today submitted a complaint to the United Nations against the South African government's use of COVID-19 lockdown regulations to promote the ANC's racial agenda. The complaint was accompanied by a newly published report titled Opportunity Knocks: How the South African Government is Using the COVID-19 Pandemic as an Opportunity to Promote Racial Discrimination. The report discusses, amongst other things, South Africa's toxic lockdown culture, which the United Nations has already cautioned against. It also takes a look at who exactly the South African government is and what President Cyril Ramaphosa's new economy looks like. We will be answering a few questions from members of the media a bit later on, and I now hand over to Aaron Roots, Head of Policy and Action here at AfriForum.
Thank you, Mariska. Speaking to the media about the government-enforced lockdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the pandemic presented South Africa with the opportunity to reconstruct its economy. South Africa was witnessing the total destruction of the economy as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, President Ramaphosa said, adding that the pillars of a new economy had to be put in place and that South Africa's new economic future must be underpinned by radical economic transformation. He then said, and I quote, "The important principles is that it must be an economic future that is going to ensure that the growth that we will have is inclusive. It must also be empowering to women, young people, and to black people in the main." This morning, AfriForum is filing a report with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Rights Issues about the extent to which the South African government is using the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to promote an agenda of racism and race discrimination. But first, a brief context to the current situation in South Africa. The South African economic lockdown in response to the coronavirus is one of the strictest in the world, and the United Nations have already warned about the toxic lockdown culture in South Africa. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights warned that South Africa was flouting the rule of law in the name of fighting the coronavirus, to the extent that it could create a human disaster. While the report that we are publishing today mentions more examples, it should suffice for now to mention that by the end of March, the amount of criminal cases opened against citizens in South Africa for contravening lockdown regulations is 230,000. In order to understand what the South African government is currently doing, one needs to understand what the ruling ANC describes as the National Democratic Revolution, or the NDR. The NDR is a Cold War Soviet concept that was explained by Joel Netshitenzhe, former head of policy at the ANC, as a process of struggle that seeks the transfer of power to the people. When we talk of power, we mean political, social, and economic control. The NDR was drafted with the goal of destroying the existing social and economic relationship, according to the ANC's strategy and tactics documents, which also states that this destruction of the economic order is directed at the liberation of black people in general and Africans in particular. The ANC's Marxist ideology explains why the movement has a strong proclivity to express its support for policies like those of the Soviet Union, Cuba, Zimbabwe, China, and Venezuela. The ANC's Marxist ideology explains why the movement has a strong proclivity to express its support for socialist policies like those in the former Soviet Union, China, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. The ANC describes its ascendancy to power and the adoption of the South African Constitution in the 1990s as a beachhead victory that would empower the ANC to use the mechanisms of state to transform the state and to change society as a whole. In 2012, the ANC further declared that it was preparing for the second transition, which implied the next phase of radical economic transformation and a more aggressive enforcing of racial discrimination through the policy of black economic empowerment. During the economic lockdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the South African Communist Party, which is frequently described as the ideological leader of the ruling alliance in South Africa, stated the following: "If anything, this period requires in earnest a second radical phase of our transition, characterized by radical structural transformation of our economy with a determined state interventions to systematically eliminate stubborn colonial features persistent in our economy. Neoliberal measures can only sink our country further into an economic abyss, as these would seek to place the burden of COVID-19 and the economic crisis on the shoulders of the workers and the poor." Let us remind ourselves that we are engaged in a national democratic revolution, an ongoing process of struggle, transformation, and development. We will need to increase the pace of democratic transformation to wipe out the excluding and marginalizing structures, relations, and systems. Interventions adopted now should actually lay the basis for a rapid advance of transformation processes." End quote. On 5 June 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 lockdown, the ANC and its alliance partners launched an anti-racism initiative in reaction to the death of the US citizen George Floyd at the hands of the police. President Cyril Ramaphosa, who not so long ago denied the existence of farm murders in South Africa, but was now leading a national campaign against racism after the death of a black man on a different continent, said that South Africa's wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few predominantly white people, while the poor and unemployed were overwhelmingly black. He continued that poverty and inequality wore a black face, an African woman's face. He said that white people who had wealth also had a sense of entitlement, and that this sense of the natural order of things, according to President Ramaphosa, led to the death of George Floyd in the USA, but also, among others, to the Rwandan genocide, the continued occupation of Israel of the Palestinian land, and to white South Africans having racist outbursts. This order of things, he explained, had to be constantly and consistently, and these are the words he used, exposed, critiqued, fathomed, condemned, opposed, corrected, challenged, and broken. Ramaphosa said that those in positions of power violated the rights of vulnerable people in all societies. To achieve non-racialism, Ramaphosa said that a fundamentally different society had to be built, which required of institutions that were regarded as representing institutionalized racism to be demolished for a new, alleged, just and equal society to be built in its stead. Earlier in 2020, the South African government launched a 200 million rand tourism relief fund to provide assistance to small, micro and medium-sized enterprises that struggle as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It then came to the light that the fund's allocation would be determined by racial quotas in order to preference companies owned by black people. Mamoloko Kubayi Ngubane, Minister of Tourism, even said that it was perfectly rational for her as a matter of executive policy to use race quotas in distributing the 200 million rand in the Tourism Relief Fund. AfriForum and Solidarity took the matter to the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria in April, but the court ruled that using race as criteria for providing relief to companies in the tourism sector during the COVID-19 pandemic was indeed lawful. AfriForum and Solidarity have since approached the Constitutional Court directly with an application to appeal the ruling. The Constitutional Court, however, ruled that it was not in the interest of justice for the matter to be taken on appeal to this court. AfriForum and Solidarity then appealed to the High Court for leave to appeal the ruling, which the court did not grant. Furthermore, Minister of Finance Tito Mbowene's favorite hotel in Magubaskloof had to send 90% of its black employees home without pay because the hotel's white owner had repeatedly been refused government's COVID-19 support. Solidarity Helping Hand has instructed its legal team to prepare for a lawsuit against government if it continues to implement regulations prescribing that the distribution of food to the poor and needy during the COVID-19 pandemic be centralized under government control. Solidarity Helping Hand received a complaint from a Krugersdorp NGO, which was stopped by government officials from running a soup kitchen. It also received reports from a number of churches that were prevented by government from distributing food parcels to the poor. To make things worse, the South African government had requested the organization to provide them with a transformation plan that indicates the extent to which the interests of black people were supported by the organization. In May 2020, Dr. Glenda Gray, one of the top scientists who advises the ANC government, a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee and chairperson of the South African Medical Research Council, slammed government's phased exit from the lockdown as nonsensical and unscientific. According to Gray, hospitals are witnessing malnutrition cases, the month-to-month phasing out of the lockdown has no basis in science, and many lockdown regulations are seemingly thumb-sucked. In the wake of this news, questions were raised about whether the ANC government was listening to the advice of experts and scientists. Dr. Gray remarked, "We believe, as scientists, that we can give and are giving the government good advice, and why they decided not to take advice or engage readily with the scientists is unknown. Why have experts if you don't really care what they think? I think the government has failed to understand the psyche of its populace." Professor Mark Mendelsohn, another expert advisor and member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, who is also head of infectious diseases and HIV medicine at Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, also said that the government's response to the phasing out of the lockdown was not a science-led approach, suggesting a rapid de-escalation of the lockdown. Both experts were swiftly reprimanded by the government for speaking out. AfriForum will not let this matter go. The world must know that the so-called liberators of South Africa is unashamedly using a global pandemic as a smokescreen under which racist, discriminatory practices are being promoted. And this, Mariska, is why we filed a complaint with the United Nations, and why, as AfriForum, we also say that in 10 years from now or decades from now, people should still remember that during this crisis, a global medical emergency, the South African government took it as an opportunity to promote a racist, discriminatory ideology. It is something that we need to make sure that they are taken to task for.
Yes, Ernst, we also have a few questions from members of the media. The public, you are also welcome to leave your question in the comment section. Ernst, the first question we have for you is that the report also mentions the ANC's position on minority rights. Why is this important?
Well, the reason, obviously the introduction we just gave is only sections of the report. There's a section on minority rights as well. And the reason why this is important is because there's this notion about the South African political system. People, especially abroad, tend to look at the South African Constitution. They read the Constitution. They think it's a good liberal document. But the question is, how is it being implemented in practice? And the position of the ANC on something like minority rights is that, to quote former President Jacob Zuma, the ANC's position is that in a democracy, the majority should have more rights than the minority. Now, we've heard people say, yes, well, maybe that was just the former President Jacob Zuma's personal opinion. It's not the opinion of the ruling party. And then the report also mentions several other examples of spokespeople of the ANC from back to the 90s up until very recently who have made similar comments. So the democracy is supposed to be a system in which minorities are protected, but the ANC's definition of democracy is the exact opposite. It's one in which the minority should literally have fewer rights than the majority.
Now, Aris, we seem to have a few questions on this issue. What do we hope to achieve by submitting this complaint to the United Nations?
Well, the point of going to the United Nations is, as we've pointed out in the report already, is that the United Nations have already taken a stance and already expressed its concern about what is happening in South Africa and the extent to which the lockdown is being enforced. The United Nations is a very big organization. And there are different offices in the United Nations. So this report will be filed with the Forum on Minority Issues, particularly the Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, who is tasked with reporting back on the manner in which minority communities are being treated across the world. As we've said many times, we do not expect of the United Nations or of other countries or other governments to solve our problems on our behalf, but it's very useful for us to get an organization like the United Nations to take a public stance about what is happening in South Africa and to say that we disagree or we have a very serious concern about what is happening in South Africa.
Apart from sending this report to the United Nations and publishing it on AfriForum's website, do you plan on distributing this report anywhere else in the world?
So this report, as I said, it will be filed with the United Nations, which we will do today. But yes, it will be distributed. It will be distributed with a media statement internationally to media outlets. But we will also send it to several contacts who we have built up over the years in various governments and think tanks and research institutions across the world.
Now, as AfriForum initiated the World Must Know campaign earlier this year, does this initiative form part of this campaign?
Yes, so the World Must Know campaign that we released earlier this year is a broader campaign that actually consists of several different campaigns, which includes the campaign against farm attacks, the campaign against racism, and so forth. So yes, the point is that this will be part of the World Must Know campaign. And the point of the World Must Know of the campaign is that the international community should firstly take note and be informed about what is happening in South Africa. But secondly, also that people should take a public stance to say we are concerned about what is happening in South Africa. And then thirdly, to get people abroad, ordinary people who are concerned about South Africa, to become involved in some way. And people can do that if they live in South Africa, they can join AfriForum. If they live abroad, they can go to friendsofafriforum.com and support our campaign through that channel.
Now, apart from bringing the international community into this, have we approached the South African government?
We have written several letters to the South African government since this lockdown started. Initially, actually, at the beginning of the lockdown, we wrote to the President and the Minister of Health to say that they can regard AfriForum as a partner in combating the spread of COVID-19. And since then, we've had several letters written to the government. And of course, eventually, as the lockdown proceeded, those letters started turning into attorneys' letters about people's rights being violated. And as I'm sure the people watching this would know, AfriForum has been involved with several court cases, probably 6 or 7, about the national lockdown, many of which we've won. So yes, we are obviously still communicating with government, and we always say that dialogue is a better way to solve things. It is, however, very clear that the South African government and the ruling party is on a different route. And they are not only hiding, they're not trying to hide what they are doing at the moment, they are publicly announcing it, that they intend to use this pandemic as a way to promote a racial agenda. And that is something that they need to be held accountable for.
As I see a comment here that nobody is scared of the courts anymore, why do we take this to court?
Well, it's very useful to be able to use the courts, and we've had tremendous success in the courts. One example during this lockdown was the Zitabiseni quarantine facility, where eventually, again, it started with communicating with government and trying to get the people out. And I'm sure people know the story, how what the circumstances within that facility was, the fact that the people living there were not able to get tested and so forth. And it was as a result of AfriForum going to court that those people were released and that those people were tested for COVID-19 eventually. And also, it was as a result of this court case that the quarantine facility was shut down. So there certainly is value in going to court.
How can the public support this initiative?
There are 3 ways. The first is to spread the message, to spread this video, or to spread the report, or to talk about this. The video will also be published on YouTube, and the report will also be published on AfriForum's website. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as I've said, if you live in South Africa, you can support this campaign by joining AfriForum on AfriForum's website. And it's a very important priority for AfriForum to get people abroad more involved, which is why one of the reasons we started the World Must Know campaign. So the point of this is also to get people abroad to join or to support this cause by going to friendsofafriforum.com and signing up there.
As that seems to be all the questions we have for today, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think the important thing here is to spread the word and to make sure that what the ANC and the South African government is currently doing in terms of using this crisis, this global pandemic, as an opportunity to promote a racist agenda and a discriminatory ideology, that they should be remembered for this. And the only way that they will be remembered for this is if people keep talking about this and if people spread the word. And that's also the only way that we're going to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Adams.
Thank you very much.